Hong Kong is on fire. Literally. Hong Kong is literally on fire. Right now you have protests that are essentially bringing Hong Kong to a halt. The Chinese government has threatened to intervene into this, and I'm going to show you the video that they put out. The signs that the protesters are using are in English, and they're in English for a reason. I guess my point is this. This is historical precedents playing out. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you enjoy this content, you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please like this video, share this video, subscribe, and of course, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Even $1 helps. I've been watching this for the past few weeks, and apparently these protests have been going on for 8 weeks. The protests in Hong Kong started over essentially a bill that would have allowed extradition to mainland China. Now, right now in Hong Kong, there's what's called a two-systems policy. I came across this maybe several months ago as I was kind of delving into Chinese history. And in a secondary thing, having the opportunity to meet a woman from China, her and I had the opportunity to talk about aspects of China, their political situation, even the perspective of China and the Chinese in a foreign policy sake. And I kind of want to talk about what's going on there and context. Context is always important. This is a fraction of the rallies that have wrapped Hong Kong. These protests have gotten to the point where they've turned somewhat violent. Let's see. Where's that fireball they're thinking was a gas bomb that was thrown at the cops. By the way, this also includes setting the police station on fire. Literally setting the police station on fire. Interestingly to note, right now these guys are operating on a two-systems policy. That two-system policy is supposed to come to an end, 50 years after British time? They signed it in 97, 98. So in 2047, 50 years. 50 years after Hong Kong was handed back to the Chinese, it's supposed to end, meaning the two-systems policy. So handing over the main line is clearly going to be secondary to this notion of handing Hong Kong back to the Chinese, or for it coming back over their direct dominion. Right now, Hong Kong is supposed to have autonomy pretty much in all matters, even though technically they're under the jurisdiction of China. As you can see, all of this started, again, with this notion of handing people over to China, extradition policies. This has evolved, however, into broader, let's say, governmental economic concerns that they're having. There are also aspects of apparently fights with people who we are unclear who they are, or people in white shirts attacking protesters. Let's see. Police are trying to regain a certain degree of control over it. Do I have it? Do I have that? Do I have that? So this is the police station in flames. Pandemonium. Hong Kong in flames. I want to detour slightly for a certain tangent, even though it's not entirely a tangent, because it's in coordination with. When I had the opportunity to be in Poland, I had the opportunity to talk to a doctor. That doctor spoke passable English. And we got into this talk about foreign policy and the U.S. policy around the world. And my point to him was, we're not going to be policemen of the world. We shouldn't be policemen of the world. And we got on this topic of Russiagate and so forth. And everything that I said about Russia, he was down on. Now, it dawned on me, I was like, oh, wait, right. The history of Poland, it digs deep. Somebody who's external to it can't necessarily get it. It's not going to dig as deep. For the people who live there, it digs deep. And he eventually was like, okay, fair enough about the Russiagate stuff. But ultimately, he was like, fuck them Russians. He didn't say it that way, but all intents and purposes, that's where he was at. But the majority of Poland's are there. The history of Poland dealing with the Soviet Union was atrocious. Stalin was just as bad as the Nazis in regards to the Soviet Union because he was embarrassed that one of the victories that the Soviet Union or the Red Army should have had was essentially not had because Stalin didn't follow orders. But beyond that point, I just want to get more so on the point of the Polish doctor. Jump a little bit to Israel. 2008, I believe. I'm in Israel, tired. I get something to eat at one of the stalls. The guy finds out that I'm American, and he says, oh, we love niggas here. Now, this puts me back a bit, but in the short order, I thought, well, this guy doesn't know the history of America. I mean, he doesn't get how it digs down deep into the individuals. There is no way his educational system in this country is going to delve into all of the nuances of what it is to be an American. And even if they did, there was no way that they could deal what it means in a flesh-to-bone way of what it's like being in the country, regardless of how you're in the country and the experience that you have. Meaning white, black, gay, straight, somewhere between. You're always objectively looking at it. You're never a part of it. The very fact that we're talking about you looking at it means you're not a part of it. You can never quite get it. I'm saying that's true across the board. In the same way that we have our experiences in this country that dig deep in us, that bother us, that plague us. I'm saying the same thing is true in other countries. What we're seeing play out here is just that. China, the history of China is not really taught in this country, but it should be taught because it's vitally important. China, at one point, was under the subjugation of Western forces. So much so, their ports were forced open so opium could be sold in China despite what China wanted. It was a profit thing. And the military was used to essentially enforce the ability for Britain to acquire that profit. We've forgotten about this. We forgot that Western powers ran roughshod over China for decades. We forgot that China tried to throw off the yoke on more than one occasion, eventually getting Western powers out. And when Western powers realized they couldn't govern the country anymore after the last rebellion. We forget that. I guarantee you, China hasn't. One of the things that Britain did in retaliation for China pushing back was to take Hong Kong. They took Hong Kong. It used to be Chinese territory. It's not Chinese territory now because Britain took it. In writing the title for this video, China is talking about invading Hong Kong. I write that in somewhat of a awareness or a context that even though Hong Kong is technically China, at some point does not Hong Kong get a choice and self-determination in this issue? They handed it over to the Brits like it was a piece of meat. And, Brits handed it over to China. And the fact of the matter is, I understand that it might have started off as a piece of China. Things changed. It could be an autonomous thing into itself. My point is this. In the same way that issues of race dig into the American thing, that we will get it in a flesh-to-bone way. And the same thing is true there. The Chinese, I would guarantee you, feel a certain stain on this notion that they couldn't defend their own territory and that they were under the subjugation of Western powers. And in the speeches that these guys have been given, it is very clear that it is forefront on their mind. I'm reading the book by Speer. It's Albert Speer, Hitler's Architect. And one of the fascinating things about Hitler is the insecurity associated with the Versailles Treaty. It dug in him. In many of the respects of the things that he was doing, it was absurd. Oh, I'm going to build this place. While the war effort was going on, he was continuously, his building projects, taking materials that should have been going to the war effort and focused on building projects at home and Hitler plots. It's insane. He was doing that. He wanted it to look better than France. Why? The Versailles Treaty and all this other stuff made him feel some kind of way about it, as if Germany was subordinate to the other powers. It dug in him. I'm saying the same thing is true for the Chinese government. These protests are somewhat of an embarrassment to China. And from the Chinese perspective, Hong Kong is theirs. And the very notion that these guys are protesting that digs deep. China released this video. This is a video talking about the protests in Hong Kong. Basically, they released a video showing that our forces, our military, is working on anti-rioting. And if you keep this up, we will deploy those forces into Hong Kong. From China's perspective, Hong Kong is theirs. And again, from their perspective, this is an embarrassment. Isn't it fascinating? I mean, we're talking about something that took place like back in the early 1900s. And it is literally playing out right now because of the way Brits worked around the world. That's astonishing. This is astonishing. And China releases the video threatening this crowd. They also put out a thing saying, don't take our weakness. In this thing of like, don't tempt us, don't tempt us. So the reports come out where China is warning these guys. Protesters in Hong Kong must, quote unquote, not play with fire and mistake China's restraint for weakness, Beijing has warned. And the sharpest rebuke yet, the demonstrations, the semi-autonomous. At a press conference briefing in Beijing on Tuesday, a spokesman for the Hong Kong and Macron Affairs Office of State Council said that months-long radical protests have severely affected Hong Kong prosperity and stability, pushing it to dangerous abyss. We want to make it very clear that the very small group of unscrupulous and violent criminals and the dirty forces behind them and those who play with fire will perish by it. Now, I want to linger on that part for a moment. We would like to make it clear to the very small group of unscrupulous and violent criminals and the dirty forces behind them, those who play with fire will be perished by it. He said, as for their punishment, it's only a matter of time. Now, why is he saying that? Because many of the signs are in English. And despite the signs being English, there's suspicions that there are elements of Washington that are helping, fueling, or paying for this. China is arguing or is alluding to this notion that the protesters may not be something in and of themselves, but may be motivated by forces of the West. But that's pretext. Whether that's true or not, it's pretext. It's just like the United States using an argument to justify their military going into a particular area of the world. They're terrorists there. They're terrorists there, and goddamn it, they need some freedom. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put our troops there. Well, China is doing the exact same thing, in this case for Hong Kong. But again, there's a historical weirdness here that technically this was at one point China's. The Brits gave it back to China, saying in like 2047, China is essentially going with this notion of a two-party, one rule, as long as we understand that the key point is one rule, two-party. Hong Kong is not appreciating that, meaning they're not liking that. And the argument that they're making is, we don't want that two-party thing. Meaning we want self-governance. We don't want a situation by which we're under China's authority and that particular government. And I think that's a fair point to make. And if Hong Kong could be an autonomous thing unto itself, then Hong Kong needs to push for a certain degree of liberation. I guess the catch here is that China is talking about putting in troops in Hong Kong to settle the riot. And they're threatening the people who are in those protests that they will do such, and don't tempt them, don't play with fire. And again, China is using somewhat of a pretext for this, that they don't believe that the protesters are acting in their own right, that they're being paid or at the very least spurred on by Western forces. Whether that's true or not is unclear. And whether it's true or not they would use that as a pretext anyway. Just because it's China doesn't mean they're being honest. And nor does it mean that they're not looking for any pretext possible in order to get further control over a country that they themselves consider to be theirs anyway. It's almost as if the very existence of Hong Kong gets across that at one point in their history they were not in control of their own affairs and that they were weak. It's a cultural stain to some degree. This is a fascinating thing. Nobody's going to watch this video, but they should be watching Hong Kong, because what's playing out could potentially be a proxy back and forth between Western powers and the Chinese government dealing with regions that China considers it to be its own. This could blow up into something nasty and big. Pay attention to Hong Kong. These protests have been going on for 8 weeks, and it doesn't seem like they're gone anywhere. And the threat from the essentially Beijing is, don't tempt us. Don't tempt us. You know, I'm one of those people that believe in self-determination. And honestly, this is an argument for self-determination. This notion of two systems, fair enough, but it's clear that the people in Hong Kong may not want to be under the authority of a Chinese state, especially when they've been living in this kind of own autonomous state. They consider themselves to be separate and distinct. And at this point, I have a hard time seeing that they're not. China can make the argument that they're ours, but again, at this point, Hong Kong has been autonomous for a very long time, and clearly they don't want to change that. If Kamala Harris is so against socialism, then why does she allow you and Tulsi to keep going to publicly owning her at that hashtag Logic Choco? That's funny. That's funny. Let's see. And I missed one early, so let me read that one from early. Hong Kong reaction. Jamarl just showed Hong Kong's reaction when he leaves it here without checking checking donations. Kills for a living. Willie Brown tumbled by saying 1%. Yes, the polling format is flawed, but still Tulsi is trash. I told you so. She's not persuading anyone. She's boring. I'm telling you, if Tulsi leaked nudes, she'd be on the 3rd debate stage. You know what's funny? She would be. And that's sad. That's sad. Kills for a living, that's sad. Even though that's true, that's sad. Damn. When you get thrashed by someone who unironically doesn't care about Palestinians and Hawaiian people and their right for peacefully protest, or anyone in the state who does, that's gotta hurt. Cheryl, your Bernie coverage is the best in independent media. Aw, thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Kills for a living. So, a few things. Kills for a living when you get trashed. Yes, she got thrashed. And yeah, I kind of brought that up too. Why doesn't Tulsi say anything about the protest that has taken place in Hawaii? I thought it was weird that she went to Puerto Rico, but not the one that was in Hawaii. So fair enough. Kills for a living. She may be at 1%, but come on. She did God's work putting a knife in Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris tumbled to the ground as such. Just Hong Kong reaction, yes. And that's fair. My wife had to go to the doctor, and she was screaming, I'm on the way out, I'm on the way out. She was leaving me, so I had to fold up the video. So fair enough. Alright guys, I'm not going to keep this one much longer. I just wanted to give a heads up of what was taking place in Hong Kong. It is fascinating politics. And by the way, just because those signs are in English, that's not indicative of the CIA or the United States. The people in Hong Kong look at this to some degree as on the footsteps of Britain, seeing as Britain was the ones that handed them over to China. The signs can be in English for that specific reaction. This notion that Britain has some level of a responsibility, some level of a tether in this particular negotiation and talk. China bristles at that. Britain has nothing to do with this situation. Now, Britain doesn't see it that way. China clearly doesn't think Britain has a role in this particular conversation. But fact of the matter is the people of Hong Kong do think that. And those signs are in English in some degree as an attestament to that, or attesting to such. Not to mention, this could be something of trying to get a Western audience of what's going on here. So that's not entirely indicative of CIA operations or Western power operations. By the same token, it also doesn't mean that they're not CIA operations that are involved in China in order to kind of pay off certain people or help these guys along. The protest was real. Clearly. The question becomes, are they being assisted? Whether they've been assisted or not is irrelevant, if I'm being honest. The protests are real. And what they're getting across, this notion of, we don't like this notion of two systems. We don't like this notion that we're under Chinese thumb. We don't want to be handed over. That type of argument. I've argued here on more than one occasion that protests that start off this way often expand their interests. Look at the Russian Revolution. It didn't start off as a thing of taking down the Tsar. And look at what happened in France. That didn't start off with taking down or broader concerns of the government. It started off as a fuel tax. Same thing with this. This starts off as one thing. We don't like this bill. And it escalates to somewhat of a broader dislike of government in the two-party system or the two-system system. Pay attention to China and what's taking place in Hong Kong. Thanks all. I'll see you in a few. Bye-bye.